At the time of recording this, the Boston Celtics have the tied best record in the league with the Los Angeles Lakers. And if you would have asked me at the beginning of the season how they would have looked, I would have said probably a 5th or maybe a 4th seed. But they're playing much higher than that. They're doing better than the likes of Philly and Milwaukee, who we thought were the shoo-ins to be competing for the Eastern Conference. And I think it's super interesting when you look deeper at the analytics. You can see that they're actually number 1 in offensive rating and 2nd in net rating, which means that basically per 100 possessions, they are scoring the most points. And in terms of defensive and offensive rating, when you net those together, they're actually 2nd in the league. And when we talk about the offense of this Boston Celtics team, I think it's impossible to ignore the effect that Kemba Walker has had now. I'll be the first one to admit it. When they signed him at the beginning of the season as the Kyrie replacement, I didn't think much of it. I was impressed. I mean, we all know what Kemba can do, but he was coming from Charlotte. He was coming from a team where he was the only star on the team and there was never any real playoff potential there. But early on in the season, what we've seen is that Kemba's just a much better fit for this Boston team than Kyrie was. Not only is he, in my opinion, a better player for this Boston Celtics team than Kyrie. That's not to say that he's a better player than Kyrie. I think we can all admit that Kyrie Irving is a better overall player than Kemba. But in terms of what this Boston Celtics team needed, I think Kemba is a much better fit. He's someone who's able to distribute the ball a lot more than Kyrie. He doesn't need to have the ball every single possession. That means that other dominant players such as Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, who seem to be breaking out this season, are more able to utilize their skill more effectively. And beyond the basketball side of things, I think Kemba's just a better leader overall than Kyrie. I think being stuck in Charlotte for damn near 9 years means that you have to build up some level of patience with players because you're never the best team on the court and very rarely do you have a chance to actually do anything with your season beyond being a placeholder or competing for a high draft pick. And that patience means he's better equipped to handle the likes of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, who are still in the infancy of their NBA careers. These are guys who are going to make mistakes on a nightly basis, not because they're bad players, but because they're simply learning their way and learning how to play better and to their full potential in the league. I mean, the other night we see that Jason Tatum wasn't shooting great. He wasn't having the best night of his life. And instead of getting annoyed with him as we saw Kyrie do, we heard Kemba Walker in the team talk saying, keep shooting, keep shooting. This means that Kemba Walker recognizes the fact that these players are learning. He's there to try help and make them better. And I think that when you compare that to the likes of Kyrie, who would get irritated, who would get visibly angry when the likes of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown were missing shots and not giving him the ball, that is a better team atmosphere and a better environment for these young players to grow and learn as they mature into the players that they're going to become in the league. With a system and set of players that isn't predicated on as much ISO ball as there was when Kyrie Irving was there, we're starting to see Jason Tatum morph into the player that we thought he was going to be last season. Someone who can be a borderline all-star and a legitimate second or first option on a title contending team. This season, Jason Tatum's averaging 20 points per game, 7 rebounds and 2 assists. He's shooting 40% from the 3-point line on 6 per game. With that being said, he's still only shooting 40% from the field. Now this is probably down to the fact that from 2-point range he's averaging about 39%. But when you look deeper into his shooting stats, it doesn't seem to be that concerning. His true shooting, which is a stat that takes into account 3-point shots, 2-point shots, and free throw attempts, sits at about 50%. And his effective field goal percentage, which is a statistic that takes into account the fact that 3-point shots are worth more than 2-point shots, sits at 47%. So overall, it seems that Jason Tatum's shooting is not actually that big of an issue. It just seems to be that when he's about 3 to 10 feet from the basket, he's averaging 31%, and 10 to 16 feet from the basket, he's averaging about 33%. So this could be due to the fact that he's still sometimes taking those long-range 2-point jumpers that we've asked and seen people try to eliminate from his game before. That very Kobe-esque mentality that he sometimes has and even spoke about at the beginning of the season. Or it could just be that there's a little bit of trouble finishing at the rim. Maybe he needs to bulk up a bit to get the strength in order to finish more effectively in and around the basket. But overall, I think that Jason Tatum is making the improvements and becoming the player that we all thought that he would become last season. And then we have the emergence of Jaylen Brown, who, after getting what I thought was a slightly overpaid contract by the Celtics, is averaging 27-2 on 52% field goal percentage. Admittedly, the shooting splits from 3 aren't great, but they aren't terrible either. What I think has been the biggest change in Jaylen Brown's game this season so far is the intent, is the fact that he gets the ball and he's not afraid to drive to the rim, which is what we have always said he's really good at. And not only that, he's still playing elite defense on the other end of the court. This, coupled with players like Marcus Smart, have meant that Celtics actually rank 13th in defensive rating, which is higher than I thought they would, especially since they lost Al Horford and Aaron Baines, two very important defensive pieces that they relied on very heavily last season. Now, that's not to say that the defense isn't a problem. I still think that when it comes to the playoffs, they're going to be susceptible to much bigger and more athletic sides. I'm talking specifically about Philadelphia and Milwaukee, because I don't think that they have an adequate rim protector. Even though Daniel Tice is averaging 2.1 blocks per game, I can't see him actually doing a job on the likes of Joel Embiid, Brook Lopez, Giannis Antetokounmpo, those sorts of big dominant players who can get to the paint and get to the rim at will. I still don't think that they have that player, even though they seem to be using Marcus Smart to guard bigs, and in some weird alternate reality that we seem to be floating in, it's working. I don't know how much longer that's going to continue, and I think that the possibilities of defensive issues arising later on in the season, and specifically the postseason, are ones that either are going to be addressed through a trade or maybe even just a change of system and ways in which the players interact with the dynamic that Brad Stevens sets for them. Speaking of Brad Stevens and systems, it's impossible to ignore Gordon Hayward, who's out for, it seems to be 6 weeks with a fractured hand. I mean, he seems to be revived this season, averaging about 19 points per game. He looks like the Gordon Hayward that we saw in Utah, the sort of Gordon Hayward that earned that max contract from the Boston Celtics. My only issue there is they haven't played much ball with him on the court. And what I mean by that is, due to his injury, we've seen a lot of Marcus Smart starting. And now Marcus Smart is just the perfect role player. He's the guy who's going to give you great defense and also only score maybe 12 or 11 points, be a good 3-point shooter and able to slash to the rim when he has to. He's not someone who needs to have the ball in his hand or demand the ball in his hand. Whereas with Gordon Hayward, he's a player who's much more effective when he's in possession of the ball. Even though we've seen him be quite a good passer this season, I still think he's better driving to the rim or spotting up from 3 off the dribble. So I think it's going to be super interesting to see how Brad Stevens balances it out, having these 4 guys on the court in terms of Tatum, Walker, Brown, and Hayward. I think he might stagger their minutes slightly so as to ensure that either 2 of them are on the court at all times, or that a specific pairing of the 4 are on the court at all times. But these are the sorts of issues that they may run into in terms of having too much talent and too much depth, which doesn't sound like it would be a problem, it could actually be an issue in terms of how the ball is spread and how fluid their attack and offense is. Speaking of their bench, I think it's just about time that we award Carson Edwards the MVP of the league, even though it's his rookie season and he's like basically their sixth man. I am absolutely in love with this guy. I love the way he plays the game. I think he's so electric, and the fact that he's the size of a pea shooter but is able to spot up and score like an immense amount of points in a good amount of minutes is really exciting. I think he's going to be quite the player to watch in the future. I just think he's really, really fun, along with Grant Williamson. Overall, do I think that the Celtics are going to win the East? No. I think their lack of defense is going to come back to haunt them against the likes of Milwaukee and Philadelphia. But I do sure as hell think that they're going to make it interesting. They're super fun to watch, and I think that a lot more people should be paying attention to that.